Hi, I'm Stacy Beasley, and today I'm going to lecture you shortly about how sociologists do their research. So let me share my screen. And I'd like to start this lecture by showing you some of these images here. And so these are meant to help you to think about survey design. So whenever you take a survey and you're made to answer, how do you feel about, let's say, the parking lot at NLC? Or, how satisfied are you with your transaction at such and such Acme business? You will respond with poor if you were not, or satisfied, it was good enough, sort of thing. Good with like, hey, you feel good about it, you walked away with a smile on your face, and excellent was like, top notch, couldn't be better. So, and we do this in a lot of different places, in business, in finding out whether or not your medical professionals are meeting your needs. I got a phone call the other day about um post I don't know, it was a 15-minute survey, and that I usually, when I get phone calls saying, do you have 10 minutes to take a survey, I say yes, because most people hang up on those people. So a lot of people will hang up, and it's really hard to get your response rate up. And that response rate is important when you're conducting research. And so every hang up is a ding in that response rate. So I try to help out, of course, when I can. Um, and if I can't take the phone call, I'll let them know, hey, I would love to do this, but can you call me back after I'm done picking up my kids in this car line? Maybe in an hour, call me back. Okay, so the top right comes from a survey that was done over telephone using random digit dialers, where people were calling out through a company called the Gallup poll. And they were asking respondents to, how do you feel about, and then all these entities, the military, small business, the police, church and organizations, religion, blah, 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 television, newspaper. And so they wanted the score, they were scoring according to, do you have confidence, like a great deal, quite a lot, some, very little, none, or I have no opinion. And you can see that, the answers vary. Um, let's see. When you look at this, it looks like people have had high confidence in the military. And small businesses per 20 and police 28, but military had the best response. In any case, on the bottom right, another type of research. So this is using a Likert scale, where Likert is when anytime you see like a 4 point system, like poor, satisfactory, and good, excellent. And so the limiting factor is that, sometimes you ask someone a question and they're like, let me tell you about how it went for me. And they start blah, 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 and on and on. And it's like, well, ma'am, sir, I can only write down like good, bad, or what are these, poor, satisfactory, good, and excellent. There's no spot for the very individualistic on and on and on. This is my experience sort of thing, which is irritates some respondents. So that's why I have the cartoon to the left here, bottom left, where you see somebody with a clipboard, maybe the sociologist, a researcher who's trying to get public opinion. And then the person that's responding looks irritated, aggravated, not happy. And that's because at the bottom it says, sorry, sir, but we don't have a category for that, which can be very limiting when we do social research. Okay, so when we do social research, we want to use a scientific method. So I'm going to tell you about that. I'm going to go into each one of these as we go. And some of the major research designs that we do. Number one, I've already mentioned surveys. Number two, we do observations. We can do direct observation. It can be as simple as like I'm sitting in a park and watching people go by and listening in when I can on conversations, or sitting. Sometimes it can be just like people in a room and there's a double-sided glass and you're observing through, they can't see you, but you can see them. And then experiments are something where you're testing something. And finally, the use of existing sources like the Census Bureau, where they every 10 years collect population on the population data surveys on the entire population of people living in the United States. Okay. So when we do, research, we want to think about a couple of things. Number one, we're more likely to get people to respond to us if we can guarantee that it's confidential. So we want to guarantee that it's anonymous and that they have an anonymity. If we can't guarantee those things, more than likely our response rate will be very low. And so, let's say let's say if you're working for a company and they want to find out, I worked for a bank that did this, where every quarter they would ask us to go sit at the computer and fill out like it was basically a satisfaction. How satisfied are you with working for a bank, blah 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 blah. And so what this did for them was identify um employees that had low satisfaction. And then when they did that, if they had an employee with low satisfaction, they would get the supervisor to basically come talk to them, find out, hey, what's going on in your life? Is there something we can help with? But it also, because a bank is trying to look at avoiding taking losses, um, it also identified people that where they might be not fully focused on their job. And when you're dealing with a lot of money, it's easy to lose focus. And so they're protecting their assets. So in any case, if you're working and you're not guaranteed confidentiality, um, you're probably not giving accurate results, because I know that when I was giving those results, it was like, yep, I'm satisfied. Even if I was totally dissatisfied, I was not going to identify myself as someone that they should be concerned with, because I didn't need any extra stress when working. In any case, so you also want to be able to tell other people who's paying for this research. And so if you are looking at, let's say, pharmaceutical industry is kind of famous for this, where they're saying, we guarantee that our product is so good, blah, 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 blah. And you come to find out that their quality control was done in-house, then can you really truly trust that? Is that ethical or unethical? And so these are the kind of questions, and these are the kind of things as you as a consumer should know and be aware of. Um, was the research done independently, like a whole different research company that doesn't have anything to gain from the positive outcome or a negative outcome? And so who's funding the research and what are they doing? How are they doing it? Are they using the gold standard of research, or are they, not so great? So you also want to be concerned with value neutrality. So you want to represent fairly and as far as possible without any significant views, by all reliable sources. So you want to make sure that you're also unbiased, right? So everybody has biases. Everybody does. I have my own biases. I learned them through socialization process. I grew up with, parents that had ideas and they, introduced them to me. Also, my culture influences me. And so some of those things that I have learned from parents, friends, family, the media, my own culture, I have had to actively unlearn. And so it is very difficult to be unbiased, but we do our best that we can, and acknowledge when it might be a problem. And if it is a problem, then maybe stepping back from that and having other researchers take over. So we are definitely trying to remain neutral, as neutral as possible when we are researching. Okay, so the scientific method is a systematic organization, um, and it's steps that we follow to ensure maximum objectivity and consistency in researching a problem. So it requires that we do things a certain way, and we write it down in a way that where if another researcher picks up our methods, that they would be able to replicate the same research. And so if they didn't have the same or similar outcome in their survey, in their research, that's not a problem. Because let's say, what we're looking here in Central Texas or in Southern California, it might be different. If we're on the island of Kauai, our findings might be completely different because we're looking at different populations. So um, it's fine that we get different results, and that is definitely worthy of being published. You just have to make sure that when you're doing your work, you describe exactly what you're doing and a methodology so that someone else can replicate it if possible. So number one, step one, define the problem. So you're going to have an operational definition to say what it is that you're looking for. And so when I was doing my master's thesis, I was looking at adolescents, so people under the age of 18, and the type of family structure they're in, to see if those that were in what we called intact family or another type of family structure, who were more likely to use drugs or have risk-taking behavior. And what I found is that people that had intact families um, were less likely to have risk-taking behaviors like adolescent drug use. So that's defining the problem. You create an operational, like, what am I going to study? And that's what I was looking at: adolescent drug use and family structure. Um, when the next step would be to look and see what other researchers have found on this particular topic. So that means you might have to go into the library, or now we don't even really have to even go into the library because we can use a library at home, which is amazing. Um, and so we look at other research, sociological research, to find out what have other people found on that similar topic, and we'll conduct a literature review. Then number three, you formulate a hypothesis, and a hypothesis is essentially an educated guess. And so you can say, well, I think that because if you have two parents in a household, the more eyes on an individual, those people are less likely to have risk-taking behaviors. And so that was my hypothesis, right? You can come up with other hypotheses as well. And so then you're going to write about your variables. So in that particular circumstance, my variables were family structure and the other one was drug use, right? So there's usually a cause and effect in order to have a scientific ideal. So depending on family structure will cause change. And so depending on which family structure they're in will have your result. Will either be using drugs, and drugs, like drug use, could be like nicotine, alcohol, marijuana, stimulants, other things. So in any case, there has to be like a causal logic, meaning that one variable causes change in the other. So that's what we're looking for. So these are essentially what we look for. We create is an independent variable and a dependent variable. So an independent variable causes or influences change in the dependent variable, and the dependent variables are changed by the independent variable, or are dependent on them, which is the effect of that thing that is changed. So usually, not always, but usually the IV, independent variable, is the antecedent, means it comes before, and the DV, which is the dependent variable, is the consequent. So that is the consequence of, family structure would be your independent variable, right? That's something that can't be changed. It's like social fact of that person's life, that whatever they're living in, whatever family structure they have. Whereas, and then the outcome is, depending on what type of family structure you're in, or more, whether or not the outcome. So the outcome is, risk-taking behavior like drug use. So here's an example. Time spent studying may result in a higher grade on an exam. So in this particular case, the independent variable is time. And so let's say if you spend 3 hours studying, which is a low amount of time, just in case you're wondering. Um, and your grade is probably going to be reflective of that, low, not a high score. A dependent grade, so a DV would be your grade. Okay, so if you had, let's say, 9 to 12 hours time spent studying, which I would consider high for a week, then the independent would be, so the time spent 12 hours, and then the grade, I would say, I would hypothesize that the grade will be higher, let's say A or B. And just so you know, in this class, the amount of time, the reasonable amount of time spent studying per chapter is 6 to 9 hours. So if you're doing a class where you're expected to complete 2 chapters a week, that's quite a bit of time. And so, think about those as those kind of things as you're studying. So there's usually a correlation, a relationship between the two variables in which change in one coincides with change in the other. So here's some more examples. A researcher wanted to know whether or not a number of people present would influence a subject's judgment on a simple perceptual task. In each case, the other members of the group gave an incorrect answer. The researcher noted when the subject conformed to the group decision. So the independent variable would be the number of people in the group. And the DV was whether the subject conformed to the group. So this is kind of like, I don't know, it's hard to interpret this. So let's say you walk into a classroom and the instructor says, "What color is the sky?" And the students say, "It's purple." And you look out and you're like, it's clearly not purple. But depending on how many people in the room are there present, you're more likely to go along with the larger group. So if there's like 20 students in the class and the instructor, and someone says it's purple, and that one person's more likely to go along with a larger group that it's agreeing that it's purple, because you're like, I'm not going to fight these people, I'm just going to go along with it. And this is what we call social control. But if the number of people in the classroom was, let's say, 2, 3, or 4, and you come into the classroom and people are saying something to be wrong, you're less likely to conform to that group because the group is not a large group. So if that helps you to make sense of this at all. Okay, I am not going to do the self-test, but I will go through them slowly here so that if you want to, you can turn down the volume and just do it yourself, and then the answers will be at the end. Okay, so in collecting, analyzing data, which is step 4 in the scientific method. So, you figure out your population, you administer the survey, and then you collect it back and then put it into whatever computer program you're going to use. I used to use SPSS, but you can also use Excel, and there's a handful of other programs that you can use to run statistics. So, your sample is their statistically representative selection from a larger population. You're going to state whether or not you're going to, are using a random sample, and then how are you randomly sampling those things. So in a random sample, everybody in the population has an equal chance of being selected. So the way that you could do this is by taking, let's say, if we're going to be studying NLC students to find out how they're satisfied with their attendance at NLC, they could say, let's get the total roster of the names. We make it scientific, or so there's no bias being entered into this. We would maybe alphabetize the list and then say, on this list, we're going to take every certain amount of students, let's say every 15th student. And so instead of just saying, oh, I know Fred, and I know Sheila, and I know Kwambi, and so I'm going to use their results. So that's when we introduce bias. So in order to avoid bringing bias into our research, we systematize it, like getting a list of all the student body, then alphabetizing it, and then taking a certain number from that category. I mean, you can also use programs that's like, random selector, which is possible these days, but in any case, I like my method anyway, better. Okay, so we want to make sure that we can ensure validity, which refers to the degree in which a measure or scale is accurately reflects the phenomena under study. And we want to make sure that it's reliable. And so what that means is that we want to make sure that the results are consistent. So if we do it here, in 2024, want to make sure that in 2025 that we're getting very similar results, and so on and so forth, because we're doing the same measures consistently. And so number 5 here is discussion and conclusion. So you're gonna discuss, did your actual results support your hypothesis, or did it fail to support the hypothesis? And so you would want to talk about, what your hypothesis was. You'd want to restate it, and then whether or not those were found, what you thought was going to happen was founded. Now, not all researchers will start hypothesis. They'll just like, let's do this and see what happens as a result. But, I would say a lot do. Some people will actually write the hypothesis after they already know the results. So it doesn't matter which you do, but I think most people have an idea of what's going to happen going into it. So number 2 here, controlling for other factors. So a control variable is a factor that is held constant to test the relative impact of an independent variable. So when you use a control variable, like, in this pandemic, they use a control variable by saying they take a population of people and they say, 100 people are going to get the actual drug, and 100 people are going to get what they think is the actual drug. And so um, it's actually they're not getting it at all, but they think that they've gotten the treatment. So both populations, subsets of the population, think that they've gotten it, and then they find out whether or not, who got COVID, and so if they find that 80% of those that had the drug got COVID, but and that's pretty high rate, or did not get COVID, right? Let's say that 80% did not get COVID or 20% did. And then the other group that got the control, which is basically like a sugar pill, or in this case, it was probably a saline solution that was injected to them. Let's say they, excuse me, they had a high incidence of getting COVID, then they would say that's how we know that it worked, because the population that actually got the drug um, had actually more resistance to getting it and getting COVID in life. So yeah, that's and then when you do a double blind survey or a way of doing that, then that becomes their gold standard of the medical industry, where nobody knows who got what. The researchers don't know, the participants don't know if they've been given the drug or if they've been given like a sugar pill or saline solution. Excuse me. In any case, so that would be the control variable. All right, so the results, you're going to report your results. And so super important when we meet once a year, this is where people present their research at the Sociological Association's annual meeting. And so ultimately what we want to do is be able to publish our results in something like this, the American Sociological Association's journal. And so you would publish here if possible. And so in your publication, you would write, your total, the results where you find, what went wrong, what went right, what would you do differently if you had all the time and money to do it again? So what were the weaknesses of the project? What phenomenon can be, but you weren't accounting for, didn't expect to have happen? And most importantly, like where to go next. So if another researcher comes along and has time and money and effort and wants to do research, they would want to read, what you did and then what your suggestions, like if you had enough time and effort and you could do whatever you wanted, um, and you could have had more time to do more research, what the next steps that you would be doing in your research to further knowledge. So just to reiterate, the research design: define the problem, review the literature, formulate hypothesis, design and conduct a study, collect and analyze data, develop conclusion, and you report your results. And then hopefully someday actually publish them in a peer-reviewed, this is what I just showed you, is a peer-reviewed journal article. So this is a scholarly peer-reviewed journal where lots of articles are published. Okay, so a couple more things here. The sociological imagination was described by C. Wright Mills as an awareness of a relationship between an individual and the rest of society, right? And so you can take the way that I think about things and my results from a particular survey, and if you collect a lot more people and don't do it in the same way, then you can generalize across those things. So the ability to view one society as an outsider is important and would be the limiting experiences and cultural biases, and which we need to be careful with. So you need to C. Wright Mills basically was saying that, being able to see your society from an outsider's point of view, and that can be really hard to see, how do things work. But when you are the person that is always on the outs, it might be easier to understand how things work, especially if, your experience is not one that is um, constantly being reinforced and supported in society. So, C. Wright Mills would encourage you to look beyond a limited understanding of human behavior. So it's not just about you, it's about other people too, right? So Mills says that sociological imagination is about asking certain types of questions, but having the ability to shift from one's perspective, to another person's perspective, and then back again. So thinking about how another person would think about something, and how, maybe my perspective as a woman in middle age would be different than maybe a woman that is in her early 20s, or a woman that is, in her late 70s, or likewise, for a man, right? Depending on different stages of life. So having the capacity to range from the intimate features of the human self and to see the relationships between the two. So, think about what C. Wright Mills has said. I think he's in your book a little bit. Um, so, Auguste Comte believed in the systematic investigation of behaviors was needed in order to improve society, right? I think I mentioned this before. It's not just about studying it, it's about changing it. And Karl Marx would definitely agree with that. So some of the perspectives, which is perspective, another word you can use is approach. Some of these books say, theoretical associations. So those words are synonymous, right? So the functionalist perspective emphasizes the part of society that is structured to maintain stability. So it sees, like, society is like a body, and that there are different organs working together for the collective health of the society. So there's a heart, which pumps the blood. There are the veins that carry the blood to the different parts of the body. A brain and lungs, all those sort of things. So in society, from that perspective, things work together for the betterment of society. So Herbert Spencer says that society is an interrelated parts that are organs that work together for the proper functioning of a body as a whole. Talcott Parsons was also a contributor and viewed that there's a vast network of connected parts in which helps to maintain the system as a whole. So, with the functionalist perspective, the manifest functions are those that are open and stated, like you go to school to be educated, right? If you are religious, you go to a religious institution to experience the divine, to have a spiritual self, um, to learn religious doctrine and religious behavior. Um, However, there are latent functions for anything, right? So with latent are the unconscious or unintended functions that are maybe the hidden purpose of an institution. And so then there are also dysfunctions, which are element of the process of society that may actually disrupt the social system or disrupt its stability. So the functionalist perspective looks at all three of these and to see like how is something particularly working in our society or not working, or preventing function. The conflict perspective is brought to you mostly by my homie here, Karl Marx. I love this picture of him, which is cartoonish. So in any case, with a conflict perspective, it assumes that social behavior is best understood in terms of conflict or tension between competing groups. So, conflict is a part of everyday life in all societies, and conflict theorists are more radical and more activist than the functionalists. The functionalists are more conservative of the view of like what is happening in society. They don't necessarily believe that their job is to fix things. Although, Comte basically said that is the whole point of it. It's not just to know what is happening and how it works, but is to also improve it. So according to conflict theory, people are competing for scarce resources. So when Karl Marx was writing, and he was a philosopher and economist, and so then sociologist, right? He's studying society as well. So he focused his work on the struggles between the bourgeoisie, which is a small group of capitalists. Capitalists are people that own businesses in a sense, and have the means of production. So they're able to have like factories, right? And the proletariat, which were the masses of workers and exploited by the capitalists. And so from the standpoint, there was no middle class. It was either you were an owner or you were owned. You're owner of production, or you could only sell your own labor. And that was the limitation there. So, Karl Marx would say that there's conflict in all relations of power and authority. And that, just as Karl Marx stressed conflict between the capitalists and workers, many feminists stressed similar conflict view between men and women. And please remember that the word feminist means a person that is concerned with equality. There's different types of feminism, but the basis of the word feminism and feminist is a person that's concerned with equality. Okay. So I don't know what you've learned before, but it's important to unlearn some of the things that, especially if you have a negative connotation with that word. Person concerned with equality. Okay. So seeing divorce as an outcome of the shifting balance of power within a family, as women have gained power and try to address inequalities in their relationships, men may resist in this particular idea where the people are competing for power. So when it comes to feminists, just being recognized as being equal, in order to shift that power. Okay. So this is an image of me outside of Karl Marx's house in Trier, Germany. When he was born, it was not Germany. What's it called? Prussia. It was called Prussia. And so Trier is like four hours east of Paris. Just to kind of, if you know where Paris is, I don't know how good you are with geography, but I think it's pretty interesting to show these images because he's a human like everybody else, and I thought it was a really unique experience to be able to go and actually see the house where he was born. So this quote of his states, "The philosophers have interpreted the world and only in verse. It depends on you to change it." And this comes from his garden. It's a bust of him in midlife. Um, and so the third perspective or theory or approach, depending on which word you want to use, sometimes we call it the symbolic interactionist perspective. So this theory generalizes about everyday forms, of social interaction to understand society as a whole. So it's a sociological framework for viewing humans as a living in a world of meaningful objects. And so, I like it when, you see it, the symbolic interactionist approach, because it's easier to see that, like, gestures, whether it's an eye roll or a giggle or a laugh, all of those things that you do, depending on the context, is communication. um if you're laughing in class, in a classroom, traditional classroom, you might be disrespectful, right? You might have just had someone tell you the funniest joke or whatnot, or maybe a spider ran across something and it made you laugh or giggle. But depending on the context, the instructor might take it as disrespectful if it goes on for too long or whatnot. Or it could be that, somebody farted, released gas. I don't know. But there's lots of reason for laughing in the classroom. So all those things are communication, right? Um, so an eye roll, or if you're winking at somebody, a wink could be like, hey, you're in on the joke, don't say anything. Or it could mean like a way to be cute about something, or it could be like a way to let someone else know that you're interested in them as more than just friends. So non-verbal communication can be like gestures, it can be facial expressions, right? A smile. It can be postures where you can be like see people sitting there, well, if they're closed off like this, you might not want to approach them because it shows to another individual, I'm not up for a discussion right now. So interactions would definitely want to know how people are communicating, even just like, let's say, students walking in the classroom, like, people tell you about themselves just walking in, right? I walk in, I've got this, Columbia is not my name, but it's on my lapel here. And so those names, tell another person about you. If it said Fendi, right? If it was a Fendi vest that I was wearing, you might think, oh, Ms. Beasley likes her, I don't know, very expensive, posh, fashionable vests. But most people will know that Columbia is like, middle class clothing that is very functional, right? Especially right now since we're freezing. In any case, so that's all nonverbal communication, right? You can figure out something about the person that you're talking to just by observing them, just by looking at, are they making eye contact? Are they not making eye contact? If they're not making eye contact, are they shifty? In American culture, we like eye contact. And so if you're not making eye contact, then maybe a person is not trustworthy. Maybe they're lying to us. So those are cultural cues that Americans definitely buy into, and it's really important to know if you're living in the United States, right? Okay. All right. So George Herbert Mead and Irving Goffman came up with this dramaturgical approach where people are seen as theatrical performers. And so, when I wake up in the morning and I'm getting my kids ready for school, I'm wearing a hat. And the hat that I'm wearing is mom. And everybody better be listening because we have, time is not on our side. We can't just dilly dally and sniff the flowers. We have to take showers, get ready for school, brush our hair, brush our teeth, feed the children, make lunches, and head out that door, right? That's my mom hat. Then when I show up at the college, then I'm wearing, instructor Beasley hat, where, I may not be concerned about certain things, but what have to do with little kids and family and shuttling people around. And now I'm, less likely to use certain words and more likely to use other words. And I won't be dressed in my night clothes, or I'll be wearing professional clothes or clothes that have been deemed professional. So these interactions are particularly important. When I'm finished there and I'm taking kids to gymnastics or swimming or scouts or whatever the heck they got going on that day, my fashion changes, my hairstyle changes. I probably have a ponytail, maybe a baseball cap, something, because it's just a make it work moment and I'm doing my mom thing, right? So, Irving Goffman says that, in every situation that you have in these social situations, that person does wear different hats. They do different things and they have a different role depending on the expectations and the status of that person in that situation. Okay, so that's enough for now. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I'm only an email away. Have a lovely day, and yeah, see you next time. Bye.